Everyone laughed when a young boy collected the town's rotting garbage and dying animals. They called him a foolish kid. But what he secretly built from that exact trash eventually forced the wealthy men who mocked him to beg for his help. The midday Texas sun beat down on the cracked asphalt like a heavy iron hammer. Heat waves danced across the dusty road, blurring the horizon into a yellow haze. At just 16 years old, Leo Bennett leaned his weight against the handle of a rusted metal wagon, pulling it step by agonizing step. Inside the wagon was a foul-smelling mountain of rotting vegetables, wet manure and discarded, moldy seeds. Suddenly, a massive air-conditioned green tractor roared past him, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. The driver, sitting comfortably in a soundproof cabin, pointed down at the boy, laughed out loud and shook his head. Leo didn't look up. He just kept walking. This was Oak Haven, Texas. It was a place dominated by massive, chemical-heavy commercial farms. In Oak Haven, farming wasn't about nature. It was a ruthless industrial machine. The environment was harsh and sun-baked. The ground was pumped full of synthetic liquid fertilizers just to force a crop out of the exhausted earth. The local farmers wore brand-new boots, drove $500,000 machines and cared only about their profit margins. Leo, on the other hand, wore faded jeans and leather work boots held together by silver duct tape. His hands were thickly calloused, covered in tiny scratches from working outside from sunrise to sunset. Yet, despite the harsh conditions and the heavy labor, there was a quiet, unbroken focus in his bright eyes. He had a very unusual habit that made the townspeople stare. While other boys his age were playing sports or looking at their phones, Leo would often stop by the edge of a field, drop to one knee and scoop up a handful of dry dirt. He would hold it close to his face, close his eyes and just smell it. He could study a single handful of soil for 5 minutes straight, rolling the dusty grains between his fingers with intense patience. He wasn't just looking at the dirt, he was trying to understand it. Every single week, the big commercial farms in town had to clear out their agricultural waste. Giant concrete bins overflowed with spoiled silage, dead wood chips, and rotten produce that was too ugly to sell. Usually the farms had to pay a steep fee to have this heavy waste removed. But then Leo offered to haul it away for free. The community thought it was the funniest joke in the county. "There goes the king of the trash empire," one of the wealthy farm owners would yell from the shade of his porch, watching the teenager drag his heavy wagon down the road. "Careful, boy. Don't let your garbage rot." The mockery was constant. They called him the trash farmer. They laughed at his dirty clothes, his quiet nature, and his foul-smelling wagon. But Leo never argued back. He never let their laughter break his focus, and he never tried to explain himself. He simply wiped the sweat from his forehead, gripped the rusty handle of his wagon tighter, and quietly hauled the community's waste back to his property. To everyone else in Oak Haven, he was just a foolish kid wasting his life collecting absolute junk. But as he dragged that wagon down the lonely, dusty road, Leo was quietly building the foundation of a magnificent vision that no one else could see. At the very end of a broken, dead-end dirt road sat the destination for Leo's heavy wagon. The town called it the Stone Tract. It was a 10-acre plot of land that was famous in Oak Haven for all the wrong reasons. It was considered the most cursed, worthless piece of property in the entire county. The ground wasn't just dry, it was a solid sheet of rock-hard, pale yellow clay. If you hit it with a shovel, the metal would spark and bounce right off. When it rarely rained, the water just pooled on top of the crust and quickly evaporated in the sun. Nothing green had grown on the stone tract in decades. But Leo didn't see a wasteland. He saw a promise. When Leo was 14, he lost his grandfather, Arthur, a gentle man who had raised him for most of his childhood. Before he passed away, Arthur left those 10 acres to Leo. They had spent countless evenings sitting together on a creaky wooden porch, looking out over the barren dirt. The old man used to point at the deeply cracked earth and tell him a secret that would change Leo's life forever. "People look at this ground and call it a graveyard," his grandfather had whispered, his weathered hand resting warmly on Leo's shoulder. "But remember this, Leo, nothing in nature is truly dead. Most of the time, it's just waiting for a second chance." After Arthur passed, Leo moved in with his uncle Marcus. Marcus was a quiet, heavy-hearted man who worked 12-hour shifts as a diesel mechanic. His hands were permanently stained with dark motor oil, and he carried a deep exhaustion in his bones. Marcus didn't understand farming at all. To him, dirt was just dirt, and he certainly didn't see the point of dragging rotting vegetables across town in the blistering heat. Yet Marcus loved his nephew fiercely. Instead of laughing at Leo like the rest of the wealthy farm owners, Marcus showed his support the only way he knew how. Late at night, in the dim, flickering light of his garage, the tired mechanic would quietly weld the cracked metal of Leo's rusty shovels. He greased the squeaky wheels of the old wagon and sharpened the dull blades of inherited hand tools that were older than Leo himself. Marcus gave Leo the silent strength he needed to keep going. And Leo needed that strength because the work was brutally hard. Every single afternoon, under the scorching Texas sun, Leo stood entirely alone on those barren 10 acres. While other kids his age were inside enjoying the cold air conditioning, Leo was swinging a heavy pitchfork. He took the trash he had hauled from town and began spreading it over the rock-hard clay in careful, deliberate layers. First the rotting wood chips, then the foul manure, and finally the spoiled produce. He repeated this grueling process day after day, week after week. His back ached constantly, his hands blistered and bled, and the smell of the rotting waste clung to his clothes. To anyone driving past the stone tract, the property looked like an absolute nightmare. It looked exactly like what the town said it was, a junkyard made of rotting food and animal waste. But Leo knew a secret they didn't. He wasn't just throwing garbage on the ground. He was carefully feeding the earth. Where the town saw a pile of worthless trash, Leo saw the slow, invisible foundation of a masterpiece. As the months passed, Leo's vision for the stone tract grew beyond the soil. He soon began collecting a completely new kind of waste. Once a month, the dusty town of Oakhaven held a loud, fast-paced livestock auction. The bleachers were always packed with wealthy commercial farmers bidding thousands of dollars on massive, prize-winning cattle. The air was filled with the rapid chatter of the auctioneer and the heavy scent of diesel fuel. Leo would sit quietly in the very back row, his worn-out boots resting lightly on the metal bleachers. He never raised his hand for the prime, muscular animals. He waited until the very end of the day. He waited for the runts. These were the animals the big farms considered entirely useless. A shivering, abandoned lamb that its mother refused to feed. A sickly calf born with a twisted back leg. The weak, the broken, and the rejected. These were the animals the commercial farmers planned to quietly euthanize or throw away because they would never turn a fast profit. While the wealthy farmers walked away to load their expensive trailers, Leo stepped forward, spending the few pennies he had saved to buy the animals nobody else wanted. When the town realized what Leo was doing, the mockery reached a whole new level. "Look at him now," one farm owner laughed, pointing as Leo carefully loaded a trembling, sickly calf into his uncle's borrowed truck. "He's not just farming trash anymore. He's building the hospital for the doomed." The men in town told him he was an absolute fool. They said he was wasting his time, his energy, and his hard-earned money on animals that would never survive the harsh Texas climate, let alone make him a single dime. But Leo tuned them out. His real work happened far away from their judging eyes. Every night, long after Oakhaven went to sleep, a warm, golden glow flickered inside Leo's drafty wooden barn. By the soft light of an old kerosene lantern, Leo sat quietly in the fresh straw. He didn't have money for expensive commercial veterinary medicines, so he relied on simple, natural remedies and boundless patience. He would sit in the dirt for hours, holding a warm milk bottle steady just to coax a few drops into a frail calf's mouth. He mixed warm molasses and wild herbs into their feed to boost their immune systems. He gently massaged the stiff joints of a rejected lamb. He spoke to them in a low, calming voice, erasing the fear they had known their whole short lives. To the commercial farmers, a physical imperfection was a total financial loss. But to Leo, a weak immune system or a limp was simply a challenge to care for them better. He didn't see broken animals. He saw lives that just needed a little more time to heal. It wasn't always a perfect story. Sometimes, despite the sleepless nights and the gentle, careful feeding, a sickly animal would quietly pass away before the morning sun came up. Those mornings were incredibly painful. Leo would dig a grave in the hard earth, his heart heavy with grief. But he never let the sorrow stop his work. Instead, he paid close attention. Every failure and every lost animal taught him a crucial, irreplaceable lesson about biology, diet, and resilience. He learned exactly how to read an animal's breathing. He learned how to adjust their feed based on the shine of their coats. Every heartbreak quietly turned into deep, practical wisdom. And slowly, under the cover of night, the rejected runts of Oakhaven began to fight back for their lives. Weeks turned into months. While the town of Oakhaven continued to laugh, something incredible was happening beneath the surface of the stone tract. It was a slow, invisible alchemy. The simple science of soil rehabilitation was working its magic. The intense Texas heat acted like a giant oven, baking the deep layers of wood chips, spoiled produce and manure. But the waste wasn't just rotting, it was transforming. Millions of tiny invisible microbes and earthworms were drawn to the decaying matter. As they feasted on the town's trash, they began digging microscopic tunnels down into the rock-hard clay. Slowly, day by day, the impenetrable crust began to break apart. It started to absorb oxygen. The dead earth was quietly digesting the waste and coming back to life, entirely out of sight. Then one quiet spring night, a rare heavy rainstorm washed over the dry county. When Leo woke up the next morning, he pulled on his duct-taped boots, expecting to find the usual shallow, muddy puddles sitting on top of the hard clay. But as he stepped out onto his 10 acres, he stopped dead in his tracks. He slowly dropped to his knees, his heart pounding against his ribs. He reached down, and instead of his fingers scraping against solid rock, his hands sank deep into rich, dark chocolate-brown dirt. It was soft and spongy, holding onto the rainwater perfectly. It smelled sweet, like a deep, ancient forest rather than a dusty desert. And there, pushing bravely through the dark earth, were hundreds of tiny, vibrant green shoots. The discarded, dead seeds he had planted so long ago had finally woken up. The earth was bursting with heirloom crops and thick, sweet grasses. Tears welled up in Leo's eyes as he let the dark soil slip through his calloused fingers. His grandfather had been right. Just needed a second chance. This new, thriving pasture changed everything for Leo's rescued animals. The grass sprouting from this rehabilitated soil wasn't like the weak, chemically forced crops that grew on the commercial farms. Because it was born from pure, broken-down organic matter, the new forage was incredibly nutrient-dense. When Leo led his doomed calves and sickly lambs out to graze, the transformation was spectacular. The animals eagerly devoured the rich greens. Within weeks, their dull, patchy coats turned slick and shiny under the bright sun. The weak, shivering runts filled out with thick, healthy muscle. The calf with the bad leg learned to balance its new, powerful weight perfectly. They didn't just survive, they completely outgrew their sickly beginnings, becoming larger and far healthier than the expensive, prize-winning livestock back in town. Yet, the rest of Oak Haven remained completely blind to the miracle. The stone tract was naturally surrounded by a tall, dense perimeter of wild mesquite trees and thorny brush. From the dusty main road, the wealthy commercial farmers couldn't see past the thick, leafy branches. They still drove by in their air-conditioned tractors, shaking their heads, fully believing that the quiet teenage boy was still wasting his youth in a useless, rotting trash dump. They had absolutely no idea that right behind those trees, the most cursed land in the county had quietly evolved into a lush, thriving, secret oasis. Building a masterpiece always comes with painful tests. Even with his rich new soil, nature still had a few harsh lessons to teach Leo. Just like a master woodworker learns from a broken carving, Leo had to learn how to handle setbacks without destroying his art. Early in the summer, a massive swarm of tiny green pests invaded his heirloom tomato plants. The leaves began to curl, turning yellow and weak. In the town of Oak Haven, the commercial farmers had a simple, violent answer for bugs. They loaded up their massive sprayers and soaked their fields in heavy, toxic chemicals. But Leo refused to poison the beautiful, dark soil he had spent years building from scratch. Instead, he turned to natural solutions. He carefully released thousands of tiny red ladybugs into the garden to hunt the destructive pests. He planted bright, golden marigolds and fragrant basil all around his vegetables, using their strong, natural scents to drive the insects away. It took immense patience and constant watching, but it worked. Every single mistake, every lost plant, and every threat only made his farm stronger. Instead of fighting a war against the earth, Leo learned how to gently guide it. Slowly, the entire property began to balance itself out, operating like a perfectly designed living machine. He didn't just throw seeds randomly on the ground anymore. He organized his 10 acres into beautiful, highly efficient zones. On the sunniest side of the land, a vibrant vegetable garden stretched out in neat, colorful rows. In the center, a thick, green grazing pasture provided an endless buffet of nutrient-rich grass for his rescued livestock. And on the far edge of the property, a stunning young orchard was beginning to bloom, grown entirely from the discarded apple, peach and plum seeds he had saved from the town's trash. The stone tract wasn't just a farm anymore. It was a living, breathing work of art. And the yield from his incredible patience was absolutely breathtaking. The crops Leo pulled from the dark earth were massive, heavy, and bursting with vibrant color. His heirloom tomatoes were deep, ruby red and tasted like pure summer sweetness. His sweet corn grew taller than a grown man, and his pumpkins were heavy and flawless. This was a stark, shocking contrast to the food grown by the big commercial farms in town. Their chemically forced vegetables were perfectly round but pale, watery, and completely tasteless. Leo's produce, fed by years of broken-down organic matter, was packed with explosive flavor and deep, rich nutrients. The same miracle happened with his livestock. The once sickly calves and the limping, rejected lambs were now magnificent, towering creatures. They were massive, their muscles thick and powerful, their coats shining like polished copper in the bright sun. They roamed freely across the thick grass, grazing peacefully, entirely outgrowing the doomed labels the town had given them. Leo had taken the absolute worst the town had to offer, their rotting waste, their dead seeds and their broken animals, and through pure, quiet dedication, he had transformed them into pure gold. Yet he still kept the old rusty gate closed, letting the wild trees hide his beautiful secret from the mocking world outside. But a secret this incredible could not stay hidden forever. Dr. Elena Rostova gripped the steering wheel of her rental car, her eyes narrowed against the blinding Texas glare. As a renowned agricultural scientist and a lead scout for the country's most elite farm-to-table restaurants, she had spent the last 3 weeks driving across the state. She was searching for true nutrient-rich organic produce. Instead, she had found nothing but disappointment. Every town she visited was exactly like Oak Haven, dominated by dusty, chemical-drenched commercial farms producing perfectly shaped but tasteless, watery food. She was exhausted, deeply frustrated, and completely ready to fly home. Suddenly, a loud hiss erupted from beneath her car's hood. A thick cloud of white smoke poured out of the grill, instantly blinding her windshield. The engine temperature gauge pinned itself into the red. With a heavy sigh, Elena steered the dying vehicle onto the shoulder of a deserted dirt road. She was stranded right at the edge of the stone tract. Knowing she desperately needed water for the steaming radiator, Elena grabbed an empty plastic bottle from her back seat. Looking around the desolate landscape, she noticed a rusty metal gate nearly swallowed by a tall wall of thick, thorny mesquite trees. Hoping to find an old garden hose or perhaps a forgotten well, she pushed her way through the dry, scratching branches. When she finally broke through the tree line, she stopped dead in her tracks. The empty plastic bottle slipped from her fingers and hit the dirt. She was completely speechless. The air instantly felt 10 degrees cooler. The harsh, dusty smell of the desert simply vanished, replaced by the deep, sweet aroma of damp, living earth. Elena blinked rapidly, refusing to believe her own eyes. Right in the middle of a barren, rock-hard desert county, hidden away from the world, was a literal paradise. Before her stood rows of vibrant, emerald-green corn stalks towering 8 feet into the sky. Giant heirloom tomatoes, heavy and glowing like red rubies, hung safely from thick, healthy vines. The ground beneath her expensive shoes wasn't cracked, yellow clay, it was deep, black, sponge-like soil. And just beyond the towering vegetables, magnificent, muscular livestock grazed peacefully on a sprawling pasture of thick grass. As a scientist, Elena knew this was biologically impossible. Just then, Leo stepped out from between the rows of tall corn. He was quietly carrying a woven basket overflowing with perfect, massive vegetables. He stopped, surprised to see a stranger in a tailored suit standing in his hidden fields. I am Dr. Elena Rostova, she stammered, her eyes darting wildly around the lush oasis. Who owns this land? What kind of secret, experimental fertilizer are you using to force this kind of impossible growth? And what elite breeder did you buy those magnificent animals from? Leo gently set his heavy basket down and wiped his calloused hands on his faded jeans. He didn't boast and he didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted his hand and pointed to a steaming pile of rotting wood chips, manure, and spoiled vegetables in the far corner of the property. Then he pointed to a massive, beautifully muscled bull grazing nearby, a giant animal that still walked with a very slight, unnoticeable limp from a childhood injury. There are no secret fertilizers, ma'am, Leo said softly. I just use the waste the town throws away. And those animals, they're the runts nobody else wanted. Elena stood frozen. She looked at the rotting trash pile, then back down at the incredibly rich, dark earth beneath her feet. Her brilliant scientific mind raced, connecting the dots of what this boy had achieved entirely alone. She realized with a shock that sent shivers down her spine, that she wasn't just looking at a successful farm. She was standing in the middle of an absolute agricultural miracle. Dr. Elena Rostova didn't just fix her radiator and drive away. The moment she got a cell phone signal, she made a phone call. Less than a week later, a dusty white van pulled up to the rusty gate of the stone tract, carrying an independent documentary filmmaker. Elena gave the cameraman strict, unbreakable instructions. Do not stage a single thing. Do not ask him to pose. Just watch him work. For 3 days the camera simply followed Leo Bennett. It captured the quiet, unbreakable focus in his eyes as he walked the rows of towering corn. It recorded the breathtaking moment when Leo plunged his heavily calloused hands into the earth, pulling up clumps of rich chocolate-black soil that had been made entirely from rotting town garbage. The lens perfectly captured his gentle touch with the massive livestock. Viewers would later gasp as they watched a towering 2,000-pound bull, an animal the commercial farmers had once thrown away as a crippled, useless runt, softly nudge Leo's shoulder like a loyal, overgrown puppy. There were no scripts and no bright studio lights. It was just the raw, honest truth of a boy in his land. 2 weeks later, the short film was uploaded to the internet. It was titled, The Boy Who Grew an Empire from Dust and Trash. At first, it was shared by a few organic farming groups. Then, a famous chef in New York reposted it. Within 48 hours, the video absolutely exploded. Millions of people across the globe sat glued to their screens, completely captivated by the sheer, undeniable contrast. The film showed the harsh, sun-baked, chemical-soaked commercial farms of Oakhaven, and then smoothly transitioned to the lush, vibrant, hidden paradise Leo had built. The internet was mesmerized by the transformation. In a fast-paced world full of loud, boastful people, watching a quiet teenager patiently turn rejected junk into a breathtaking masterpiece was incredibly powerful. He had never asked for attention. But overnight, viral fame found him anyway. Back at their small, dusty house, Uncle Marcus was lying underneath a broken-down pickup truck, his hands covered in dark engine grease, when his old cell phone began to ring. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered it. 10 minutes later it rang again. And then again. By sunset, the tired mechanic's phone was ringing completely off the hook. The sheer volume of demand was staggering. Executive chefs from top-tier farm-to-table restaurants were offering massive premium prices for just a single crate of Leo's flavor-packed heirloom tomatoes. Elite cattle ranchers, the kind of men who normally spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on perfect genetics, were practically begging for a chance to buy the incredibly healthy, muscular livestock Leo had rescued from the brink of death. But it wasn't just wealthy businesses calling. Everyday people from all over the country were sending messages by the thousands. They wanted to buy the miracle seeds that had been grown in his perfect dirt. They wanted to know his secret. For years, Leo had worked entirely alone, hidden behind a wall of wild trees, mocked and laughed at by his own town. But now, the rusty gate of the stone tract had been blown wide open, and the entire world was standing in line, waiting for what the trash farmer had created. With millions of eyes suddenly focused on the stone tract, the massive offers began to pour in. Huge corporate agriculture companies sent men in expensive suits, offering Leo millions of dollars in cash to buy his land and his secret formula. They promised to make him incredibly rich if he just handed over the keys. But Leo didn't even blink. He politely shook their hands and sent them packing. He knew exactly what they would do. They would bring in their heavy machines, soak his living earth in toxic chemicals, and ruin the soil all over again. He wasn't going to sell out. Instead, Leo used his sudden, explosive profits to do something that made the wealthy commercial farmers of Oakhaven laugh one last time. He bought more land. But he didn't buy prime, green real estate. He bought hundreds of acres of the most barren, rock-hard, worthless clay in the entire county, land nobody else wanted, bought for pennies on the dollar. And to heal this new land, he scaled up his entire operation, happily taking in thousands of tons of the town's rotting agricultural waste. With Uncle Marcus finally able to quit his grueling, exhausting job as a mechanic to help manage the overwhelming flood of orders, Leo carefully organized his rapidly growing business into 3 distinct, premium collections. The first was the Heirloom Harvest. This was his incredible flavor-packed produce, shipped daily to the finest, highest-paying restaurants across the country. Chefs gladly waited months on a waiting list just to buy a single crate of his giant ruby red tomatoes. The second division was Second Chance Pastures. This focused on his magnificent, incredibly healthy livestock. But true to his heart, Leo still refused to buy expensive genetics. He still sat in the back row of the local auctions, buying only the runts, the sick, and the rejected. He let his quiet patience and his nutrient-dense grass transform them into absolute powerhouses. But his third and most profitable venture shocked everyone. It was called Miracle Compost. Leo started bagging and selling the very thing the town had mercilessly mocked him for, the rich, dark, sponge-like soil made entirely from their own rotting trash. Gardeners and organic farmers from all over the world paid premium prices to have bags of Leo's life-giving earth shipped directly to their doors. Within a few short years, the boy who dragged a rusty wagon full of junk down a dusty road had quietly built a multi-million-dollar farming empire. But if you walked onto the property, you would never know it. There were no giant glass office buildings or flashy corporate signs. The headquarters of this massive business remained the exact same simple wooden barn, though Uncle Marcus had happily reinforced the walls and fixed the leaky roof. And despite the millions of dollars in the bank, Leo Bennett hadn't changed one single bit. Success never made him arrogant, and money never rushed his pace. He still wore faded jeans and boots covered in dust. If you wanted to find the brilliant CEO of this massive agricultural empire, you wouldn't look in a fancy boardroom. You had to walk out into the quiet fields. There, you would find a humble young man with deeply calloused hands, dropping to one knee to smell a handful of dirt, or sitting gently in the fresh straw, patiently bottle-feeding a sickly, trembling calf that the rest of the world had thrown away. Then the ultimate test arrived. The following summer, an unprecedented, brutal drought hit Oak Haven. For 4 agonizing months, not a single drop of rain fell from the blinding blue sky. The heat was terrifying, baking the county like a brick oven. For the big commercial farms, it was an absolute nightmare. For decades, these wealthy farmers had sprayed their fields with harsh chemical fertilizers, completely stripping the soil of its natural life. Because their dirt had become nothing but dead, dusty powder, it had absolutely no ability to hold water. Without their massive irrigation pumps running day and night, their ground completely surrendered. The earth cracked open into deep, ugly trenches. Their millions of dollars of chemically forced crops withered, turned brown, and snapped in the hot wind. Their shiny $500,000 tractors were completely useless. The wealthy farm owners were watching their massive empires dry up and blow away. But if you looked at a map of Oak Haven from above, you would see a vast, heartbreaking ocean of dead, brown dust, and one giant, glowing square of bright emerald green. Leo's farm didn't just survive the terrible drought, it thrived. The secret was the trash. Because Leo had spent years patiently layering rotting wood chips, spoiled produce, and manure over his land, his soil was packed with deep, rich organic matter. That dark, living earth acted exactly like a giant sponge. It trapped moisture deep underground and refused to let the harsh sun evaporate it. It held onto every single drop of morning dew. While the rest of the county was turning into a lifeless desert, Leo's tall corn remained vibrant, his heirloom tomatoes remained juicy, and his thick green grass kept his massive rescued livestock perfectly fed. The undeniable truth finally broke the pride of Oak Haven. One blistering Tuesday afternoon, a long line of brand-new expensive pickup trucks slowly rolled down the dirt road and parked outside the stone tract. The doors opened and out stepped the very men who had spent years laughing at Leo. The men who had mockingly called him the trash farmer. The men who had told him he was wasting his life. They didn't look like arrogant kings of the county anymore. They looked exhausted, defeated, and deeply afraid of losing their family farms. The leader of the group, an older, wealthy man with a fiercely prideful reputation, slowly walked up to the rusty gate. Leo was standing on the other side, leaning against a wooden fence post, his hands covered in dark soil. The older man stopped. He swallowed hard. Then he reached up, took off his expensive cowboy hat and held it tightly against his chest. He looked at the lush, green paradise behind Leo, and then he looked the teenage boy right in the eye. "We were wrong," the old man said, his voice trembling with humble regret. "We laughed at you. We called you a fool. But our land is dying and yours is alive. Please, teach us how to save our farms." It was the perfect moment for revenge. Leo could have laughed right back in their faces. He could have told them to turn around and drive away. But that wasn't who Leo Bennett was. Leo simply wiped his calloused hands on his faded jeans. He reached out, pushed open the rusty gate, and offered the older men a warm, welcoming smile. "Come on in," Leo said softly. "Let me show you where to start." In that single quiet moment, the young man proved that his character was just as rich and beautiful as the soil he farmed. The world watched Leo Bennett and believed he possessed some elite, hidden knowledge. The wealthy commercial farmers and the corporate executives were entirely convinced that his massive success was born from a secret scientific formula or a lucky patch of magical dirt. But the truth was far simpler and far more beautiful. The boy who dragged a rusty wagon through the scorching Texas heat never had a secret. His only true gift was his willingness to see immense value where everyone else saw absolute garbage. He didn't look at a sickly, trembling calf and see a lost cause. He didn't look at rotting produce and see a useless junkyard. He saw a masterpiece that was simply waiting for a second chance. Before we go, remember this profound truth. God operates in the exact same way. He rarely begins his greatest works with perfect, flawless materials. Again and again he takes what the world discards, the broken, the rejected, the overlooked, and the seemingly worthless, and he patiently cultivates it into something miraculous. The world might look at your past mistakes, your deep flaws, or your shattered dreams and tell you that you are entirely out of chances. They might call you a lost cause. But God doesn't see you that way. If you feel like your life is completely barren right now, if you feel like your heart is deeply cracked like the dry earth of the stone tract, do not lose hope. The Master does not throw anything away. He uses every tear, every failure, and every season of drought to build a deep, rich foundation for your future. In the gentle hands of God, every broken piece of your life has a profound purpose. It just takes faith, hard work, and the courage to keep believing when everyone else is laughing. If this incredible story of faith and hard work inspired you, please subscribe, share this video with a friend, and leave a comment below. Your support helps us share more miracles. May God bless you. See you in the next video.